So, we can't seem to keep away off the topic of coups recently. On a lot of my good morning walks recently, has almost been predominated by essentially the coup or the attempted coup by Trump supporters on the 6th, and essentially the continuing fallout of that situation. Now that has come to an end at the moment, but I wake up today to find out that there has been an actual successful coup, because as the incident in Washington showed, that was a unsuccessful coup. Essentially, they got there and then didn't really know what to do. However, if you've been keeping abreast of the news, you'll know that in Myanmar there has been a successful coup by the military. And essentially, when coups like that work, essentially what happens is the military goes and takes important civilian infrastructure such as roads, bridges, town halls, police stations, fire stations. Essentially, they go in and they take control of it all, as well as arresting and detaining their version of MPs, public officials, etc. That is essentially a successful coup. However, as we're going to go over in this article today, there was an attempted coup by someone in the UK. And as people know, we British have a very bizarre view of coups. In fact, for those of you history buffs might know, or even those from the Netherlands, will know that in their air education and pretty much of European education, the Netherlands, or the Dutch as they were called back then, actually invaded the United Kingdom and successfully took it over. And this is how William of Orange became King of England, although again it wasn't, like I say, to put him on the throne, it was to put his wife on the throne. But like I say, he was the guy with the army, so and as far as it's on the continent, it is called the Dutch invasion. However, over here, especially not only in our history books but even the recorded history at the time, refers to it as the Glorious Revolution. And we have very, shall we say, British way, it's a typical British way of viewing things like that. It wasn't an invasion, it was just a glorious revolution. And as such, there was such an attempted coup to remove Boris Johnson. And you won't be surprised to know who it is when we get into it. But before we do get into it, please remember to hit that like and share button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link. And as always, thank you very much to those people who do support the channel in that way. And on with the story. So this comes from a news source today. First time we're using going through them. Tortoise Media. The title is The British Coup You Missed. So, since the storming of the US Capitol on the 6th of January, there has been much ill-conceived self-congratulations in and around Westminster about the immunity of the British political system to such uncouth insurrection. We have our ups and downs, one minister said to me, but it couldn't happen here. Again, a lot of people in the US said it could never happen here, and yet it did. Anyway, it continues. It is true that the bison horn headgear is much harder to get a hold of in the House of Commons than in the Appalachians. It is also true that Metropolitan Police would take a rather more robust view of a mob trying to break into the Palace of Westminster than some, not all of, the officers on duty in the capital did to the hordes of invading the temple of the US democracy. Giving directions to white supremacist invaders and assisting with their selfies is certainly a novel form of counter-subversion tactics. Yet, we should not be quite so smug about the stability and sanity of our own political culture. Insufficient attention has been paid to, for example, the fact that one of the Conservatives' most powerful backbenchers last week explicitly threatened a vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson's leadership. On Thursday, a letter from Steve Baker to his Conservative colleagues was disclosed in which the MP for Wycombe expressed dismay that the current lockdown could last until late spring, and that the government had adopted a strategy devoid of any commitment to liberty, and that if we continued forward with this strategy, that hammers freedom, hammers the private sector, hammers small business owners, and hammers the poor inevitably, the Prime Minister's leadership will be on the table. That's surprising coming from Steve Baker. Suddenly caring about the poor. Of course, this guy is one of, as we've expressed before, this guy is one of the hardcore Brexiteers, and he's an absolute free market fundamentalist. And one of the things to protect the poor, the welfare system, and regulations to help protect these people, he is ideologically opposed to. So, it's shocking at the moment that he suddenly cares so much about the poor. Maybe if he does, he maybe wouldn't have voted against trying to take away the universal credit boost, for example. That would have taken £1,000 away from people who are currently relying on that social safety net. So anyway, it continues. Really? A plot against the PM now? Only the day before, Wednesday the 13th of January, the government had reported a record tally of 1,564 COVID-related deaths and a further 47,000 cases of infection. As Sir Simon Shreves, Chief Executive of NHS England, explained yesterday on BBC's Andrew Marr show, since Christmas Day, we've seen another 15,000 increase in the inpatient in hospitals across England. That's the equivalent of filling 30 hospitals full of coronavirus patients, and staggeringly, every 30 seconds across England, another patient is being admitted to hospital with coronavirus. In this context of rampaging disease, new variants of the virus vexing doctors and scientists, and the soaring death toll that Mr. Barker urged his fellow Tory MPs to warn the Chief Whip, Mark Spencer, that the PM's leadership would be in peril if the government does not set out a clear plan for when our full freedoms will be restored, with a guarantee that this strategy will not be used again next winter. Could there be an uglier juxtaposition? A pandemic that has frequently claimed more than 1,000 lives a day as our fellow citizens choke and drown drown their way towards a hideous and wretched isolated death, and the political posturing of freedom self-appointed protectors, men in suits securing their spots on news bulletins by ratcheting up the threat to the Prime Minister or insinuating that they know much more about pathogens than world-class epidemiologists. So lest there be any confusion, a threat of vote of no confidence in the governing party's leader is not the same as a storming of the legislature. In theory, at least, Mr. Barker was well within his rights to issue such an ultimatum, though he withdrew it pretty quickly. Harry Cole, the Sun's political editor, tweeted the story at 3:46 p.m. on the 14th of January, and at 5:42 p.m. Mr. Barker, mindful, no doubt, of finding a metaphoric horse's head at the bottom of his bed, tweeted hastily that, "I am clear Boris is the only person to lead us out of these difficulties, and I support him in his endeavour." Still, his behaviour was indicative of something rotten within the Conservative Party and the political discourse generally. Throughout this particular rebellion, fuzzled out in essentially 38 minutes, it was not the first time that Mr. Barker has taken himself to act as a wrecking ball of conscience of his party and by extension the nation. Twice the chairman of the European Research Group, he proved himself an adept organiser of backbench hostility to any backsliding on Brexit. Often a better whip than Theresa May's whips, but where does a rebel go when he has achieved his objectives? As one senior Conservative puts it, leaving the EU has left Steve Barker with a Brexit-shaped hole in his life. He has to oppose something. And that something has been the government's COVID strategy, and specifically its lockdown measures. Foolishly, Number 10 has too often indulged Mr. Barker's conduct and inviting him with 3 scientists and a data analyst to scrutinise the plans for a second lockdown on the 31st of October, the Halloween holiday, when it seemed that the government's entire decision-making mechanism might falter. As always, appeasement only encouraged that which he sought to end, and Mr. Barker was a prominent among the 34 MPs who voted against a 4-week lockdown on the 4th of November. And a few days later, he and Mark Harper, a former chief whip, established the Coronavirus Recovery Group to campaign against COVID restrictions. On the 1st of December, he was one of the 55 Tories to vote against Johnson's post-lockdown tier proposals. Here we stand at a profoundly dangerous moment, Mr. Barker declared, heading into infringements on our liberties around vaccinations and testing which we would never normally tolerate. About one thing he is right, which is that this is a profoundly dangerous moment. Deep in the doldrums of the third national lockdown, the entire anti-COVID strategy rests on a knife edge. The vaccine rollout is now underway and are vulnerable to supply chain disruption, manufacturing hitches, and the flaws inherent in the pop-up delivery infrastructure. But still, manifestly, a route out of the pandemic it is. And there is tentative evidence that the case numbers are starting to fall. Yesterday's total was of 38,000 and was down to 16,000 week on week. But we know that other unknowns are enough to urge caution. The variants of the virus persist, an ever proliferating challenge. The decision to count those who have received a single dose as vaccinated has divided medical opinion sharply, and we await firm data on the impact of the jab on transmittability. And it is hard to imagine a worse moment for frivolous political games or the exhibitionism that characterises the outpourings of most lockdown skeptics. I respect those who are sincerely wary of the way they fear to be irreconcilable encroachments upon civil liberties and upon considered parliamentary scrutiny. David Davis, for example, was right to insist upon a sunset clause in the original Coronavirus Act, which now mandates review every 6 months rather than originally tabled after 2 years. Yet most of the mulch of the lockdown skepticism is distinctly unsavoury. It includes well-established and tiresome priggerish variant of the conservative libertarian captured in The Assault on Liberty, an undistinguished tract written back in 2009 by one Dominic Raab, not yet an MP. Here's an excerpt from it. It says, "Liberty lost and democracy denied, we are submissively asserting a seismic shift in the fault lines of the relationship between the state and the citizen. Lurking at one level below this is the pseudoscience and the headline-seeking contrarianism peddled by the right-wing journalist Toby Young on his Lockdown Skeptics website. Take a further step down and you're soon in the realm of conspiracy theories, QAnon madness and the loathing of elites, and the claim that the global lockdowns are simply a drill for the Great Reset, in which we shall all be slaves of an authoritarian world order controlled by nanochips injected into our bloodstream by the order of Bill Gates and his fellow lizards." Wrapped up in this hyper-modern rhetoric and weaponized by social media, the central message of this multi-layered narrative is that, far from their ostensible purpose to save lives, the COVID restrictions are a cover for a plan straight from the pages of dystopian science fiction. Yet I cannot help feeling that an older instinct too is involved as well. The folklorish behaviour and superstition that always accompanies plagues, that nurtures crazy conspiracy theories and irrational attacks on those in authority. And I dare say Mr. Barker would be affronted by the suggestion that he lurks on the same spectrum of the anti-societal idiocy as the trolls of QAnon, and might even adjust his glasses in indignation of this. But this can't be helped. On a day when hundreds more Britons will die in overcrowded hospitals, it is hard to feel any sympathy for any politician who gets his kicks from photobombing a national emergency. And that's true. The anti-COVID recovery group is teeming with hardcore Brexiteers who don't really care. I mean, consider this for a second. Steve Baker said that he wanted to ensure that, written into the next act, that essentially there would be no more national lockdowns. Consider this for a second. That if the vaccination program doesn't work, and fingers crossed that it does work, let's say we are in a situation where the coronavirus is getting out of control again, and we are now in a position where we can't institute a national lockdown. What do we do? These absolutely ridiculous guys in the COVID recovery group are exactly the same people who are the hardcore Brexiteers, and they are that same libertarian line running through them because they are free market fundamentalists. They don't care how many people die, they just want to get people back to work so that these companies that they represent and that they have vested interest in can start making money again. And now you see the absolute danger, as we always warned. It was always shocking that Brexit supporters would, the Brexiteers themselves would always point to the Remainers as being the elite of the country, yet it wasn't. It was people behind them who were just as elite, pointing the finger at them. And, and lots of the Brexit supporters have been conned, because we've already seen them trying to make moves to replace some of this stuff. And, it just gets even worse the more you think about these more you hear about these anti-lockdown skeptics and just what they plan and want to do. They want to send people back to work when we only just hit a few weeks ago the 100,000 people dead of the coronavirus. It is still out there. Even if we do roll out this vaccination program, we still don't know about the transmissibility. That there's still so many variables that we need to take into account, and these guys don't care. All they care about is their precious market. So, as always, thanks for watching. Please do remember to hit that like and share button on your way out, and of course down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and as always, we'll see you all next time.